guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm with Dylan Lang and we are going to discuss Dune 2. We also discussed Dune, the first part, a couple of years ago, and I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to watch it before you watch this and see what we thought a couple of years ago about the first movie. But we'll go ahead now and talk about the second one, which just came out a couple of weeks ago. I think it just passed $500 million at the box office. And in what, 3 weeks? So we'll have to see how well it does in the next 3 weeks, I guess. I know a lot of people are going to see it multiple times. I've seen it twice. I believe Dylan's seen it at least 3 times.
I almost saw it a 4th time, but 3 times I've seen it.
So do you want to make an overall impression, first of all, before we get into some nitty gritty, Dylan?
Overall impression, I guess I'll do from my standpoint right now after seeing it 3 times is that it is probably one of my favorite movies. I have it ranked alongside Part 1 because they're kind of inseparable. It's kind of one big movie. And so it's hard to be like, oh, well, this one is far superior than the other or anything. I think they're kind of companion pieces. I was really impressed with like just the scale of it. It's a movie that is easy to be kind of like immersed in terms of just the visual language. There are some changes that, as a Dune book fan, I think I'm up to Heretics of Dune now. I question them, especially since there's going to be some pretty major changes going into Dune Messiah if they end up adapting that, which has been Denis Villeneuve's plan, from what I understand. But overall, really good. Favorite of the year so far. There's not a lot that's out this year so far, so but
even Marvel's only put out 1 movie this year, I think, right? Just the Deadpool movie.
Yeah, and that's not even out yet. But like Madam Web was like a not a massive deal, but that was like their Marvel's thing. Beekeeper with Jason Statham. They did just this last weekend actually had some 2 kind of, they're horror movies, so they're not massive, but bigger deals.
You often get dumped in the winter since they don't expect them to have a lot of Academy Award kind of, buzz.
Yeah.
I guess Ghostbusters just came out a couple of days ago.
Oh yeah, that was just like last night, I think. So there's some stuff rolling out. There's also a new Godzilla and Kong movie, I think, next Friday.
I don't know about how I feel about that. I'm not a big King Kong fan like Godzilla. I thought Godzilla -1 was a great movie. So if we don't talk about that sometime, that would be cool as well.
Oh, for sure.
But we'll get back to Dune now. I've seen a lot of people just going on and on about how great Part 2 is. I will say the first time I saw it, I was kind of not that impressed. It was like, and I kept thinking about how long have I been here? And I didn't want to look at my watch because I got a little Fitbit, and the screen lights up, and there was someone sitting next to me I didn't know. I'm like, they're going to like get annoyed if I keep looking at this little glowing screen, So I just sat there and I didn't know how long the movie was, but it's like, it felt really long. But the second time I went to see it, it didn't feel really long. And I don't know if that's because I kind of knew it was coming, and so I was more anticipating things or something. But the second time I was not tempted to look at my watch. I thought it was much more interesting in terms, especially in a couple of the characters that I really didn't like in Part 1. And now in Part 2, I like one of them better and like dislike one of them even more. So sometimes I've disagreed with how they've gone with the character arcs, but overall, I think the second time it was just much more impressive to me. I'm not sure why it took 2 times, but I did see Part 1 3 times the week before we went to see Dune 2 because I really do like Part 1. I would think right now it kind of edges out Part 2 for me. And I don't know, why, because I don't know if there's anything real special. I mean, I did like Oscar Isaac as Leto. I did like love those scenes on Caladan where they're walking through obviously a centuries-old graveyard of their ancestors. There was just a kind of a feeling of history and time that maybe I didn't get so much in Part 2. But I really the thing that I know about Oscar Isaac is that his beard looked pasted on. I don't know if it was a real beard or not, but it didn't look real. And I was like, could someone like make that look like it's actually growing out of his face and not just stuck there with some spirit glue? But
Apparently that is just how he grows his facial hair. It's insane.
Yeah.
As someone who just gets kind of wiry facial hair, I'm very jealous. Uh,
Well, it didn't interfere with the performance that much. But anyway,
yeah.
so part two. So we get to the little nitty gritty now. The people I've seen praising it the most seem to be the people that also say, and I never read the book. And so now I'm wondering if the people who haven't read the book got blown away more or not, because I'm not a book purist. I love Lord of the Rings movies. The Lord of the Rings is still my favorite book. And there are many things that Peter Jackson did that I'm like, I can see that. For telling this story in a visual way, you would have had to change that. I'm fine. And I don't really care that Tom Bombadil gets cut out, and
Yeah.
that Arwen got substituted for Glorfindel. Yeah, this, okay. And Faramir's character got changed a bit. Okay, cool. I mean, my problems with Peter Jackson's version are very nitty gritty things. This little bitty things, like I hate all the couple of dwarf tossing jokes they threw in there. You're like, why are we even having these? So I figured you can turn Lord of the Rings into like a 12-hour movie, and I just have little things like that to complain about. You did a fantastic job. And I
Yeah.
think that here again, I'm thinking that Dune is always said to be unfilmable, and probably a lot of things are just beyond. There's so much in that book that he's left out the entire like spacing guild, right now.
Yeah.
And so he's even after two movies and about 6 hours of runtime, you had to cut things. And I'm fine most of the time with translating things to the screen. And I think, visually and with the music and everything, just the effect of the seeing it on a big screen is amazing. The scope is huge. The music is amazing. And then I
Oh, the
saw,
music is incredible.
and yeah, well, Hans Zimmer, always seems to deliver. And I saw an interview with him and he said he had 2 weeks of piano lessons. So that's like the extent of his musical training. And other than that, he's kind of like self-taught and just does what feels, like he wants. So it's like, so this guy is not like a classical musician. He just like approaches things, I guess, from an out-of-the-box kind of perspective. And certainly here with
Yeah.
this the whole sound, I even like the sound that ornithopters make. I think just the whole sound production is great. So yeah, visually it's stunning. The music is stunning. The sets and the cinematography and all that are stunning. Um, but then we get into some of the characters. So I'll let you have a chance to talk about music or sets or whatever.
Well, music is incredible. There's some stuff in the like Harkonnen world. Anytime we cut to
Mhm.
them, that almost kind of sounds a little bit like the newer Doom games. Uh, there's just like a little bit of like this like electronic synth, but like really hard core instead of just like the usual that goes through the Dune world. I also really liked how he managed to make the rather triumphant theme from the first movie a little more sinister
Mm,
here, because kind of dabbling a little bit into spoilers here. The movie, with the context of the book series being done now, the movie pulls a little bit more from like Dune Messiah in terms of its like characterization and telling the audience more about how they should be feeling about
mm,
Paul's rise to power. The book was very subtle about it. Usually there's like, I think there's like one or two sentences where they talk about how, all of this stuff is planted, but there's not like a soundtrack to tell you, hey, this isn't a good thing that's happening.
mm,
um but yeah, and the set design is incredible. The moment that everyone really seems to talk about is that like Harkonnen gladiator ring, just because it was
mm,
shot in infrared. It's weird and striking, and it's an introduction to a character and actor who I thought did a pretty good job with,
mm,
who's kind of not that well defined in the book.
mm.
And yeah, so that sequence, that set, everything about that was pretty incredible. um
Yeah, I don't know that
Also,
Austin Butler stole the movie, but definitely once he got on screen, the movie got a lot more interesting.
yes, absolutely. There's like a what it happened with like Top Gun Maverick a couple of years ago, where people were like, there's a stretch in this movie where I'm convinced I'm watching like the greatest movie ever. And pretty much any scene Austin Butler is in, I am kind of like, this might be one of the best movies ever made.
Hmm.
I really liked him in Elvis. I don't think Elvis is that great of a movie, but I really liked him in that, and he knocks it out of the park here. The costume design, I think the art direction in general is a step up from part one. Part one was very kind of this is still brutalist, but it was like there wasn't a lot of weird in part one, whereas part two, I feel like kind of leaned a little bit more into that in the aesthetics. The Harkonnen, like armor that you see at the beginning of the movie, like that very first scene, is much more striking than it was in part one. And just the costumes that like Florence Pugh wear are like increasingly like weird and more armor-esque. I thought I was really blown away by just the art direction. I thought it did a good job at capturing Dune while having without just like retreading like the miniseries or the David Lynch movie.
Yeah, I have not. I watched the miniseries when it was originally on. I've not seen it since. I remember being completely underwhelmed by it, and I didn't like anything about it. I don't think. The costumes were horrible, and everything was just like awful. But I think a lot of people do like it. So, and I think they went through maybe Children of Dune, or did they just get through Dune Messiah? But on that
So they
one,
did. So they did Dune as one season of like 3 hour-and-a-half episodes, and then they titled the second season Children of Dune, but the first episode is an adaptation of Messiah, and then the last two are an adaptation of Children, with James McAvoy as Leto II.
Okay. So, yeah, like the first scene you mentioned, I liked a lot of stuff that was going on where we'd see the soldiers, first of all, have like weird, like anti-gravity stuff, right? So they sort of float to the top of this, rock. But then when they're coming down, the Fremen are killing them and tossing them off, and the heavy thuds as they hit the ground too, were very impressive. But just the whole scene, the way that was constructed, was really impressive to me.
Yeah, that scene, it's just a great opening, especially after getting Princess Arulan's little like catch up, basically. I'd be interested to see a movie like an edit that does kind of combine these two into one, and see if how you could keep Princess Arulan's thing without it feeling a little redundant. Like watching these back to back, I feel like might affect them a little bit. At least that specific moment, but the actual opening, you get this like weird in utero like opening shot, and then you just go right to this like harsh orange. It's the most interesting that they really like use color on Arrakis, which is a little bit of a shame, because I do think Arrakis should have a little bit more color than what the Denis Villeneuve aesthetic has done. It's usually that kind of same like light yellow, but that eclipse moment is just awesome. I adore that, and I think the Alia stuff being like there right at the forefront is kind of interesting, and where it goes, I guess, or I guess where it doesn't go, is one of the largest changes probably from book to movie. Which I don't know how you felt about that, but I thought Rebecca Ferguson did a great job, and I kind of liked that. While we're missing like the David Lynch like Alia like running around giggling and stuff, we do get something that is still pretty uncomfortable and weird
and different. Like even like the opening scene with the floating, I don't know, I've ever seen anything like that before. That
yeah
you expect to see like a little jetpack or something to shoot people up, but these kind of just sort of float. It's like, well, I don't know if I've ever seen anything quite visually like, in a movie like that. And yeah, I think they're doing that with Alia too, where we maybe haven't quite seen someone do this, and the fact that Rebecca Ferguson then talks to her, right, and then she's saying blah blah blah, um, I mean that was pretty cool. I liked, and maybe for that reason, I liked her better in this. I did not like Rebecca Ferguson in Dune Part One. I thought, oh, she's completely miscast. This is horrible. Who could they have found been any better? Part two, she kind of, for me, it kind of redeems that, where she, we're seeing where she's going, being very, very Bene Gesserit, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I was reminded of the scene in part one where Leto asks her, "Will you protect Paul?" And she says, "With my life." And then he says, "Well, I'm not asking his mother. I'm asking the Bene Gesserit." And
Yeah.
she doesn't answer him, right?
Yeah.
She says, "Well, why are you talking like this? This isn't like you." She just completely skips over answering the question. And in this movie, I think you see why, because she's going to do the Bene Gesserit thing. She's going to manipulate things behind the scenes, even if that seems maybe evil,
Yeah.
to other people, right? She's not a good guy either. Here, she's pushing Paul, she's pushing the Fremen, she and Alia are planting all these seeds in the background, and she's going to go to the south basically to raise, this, fanatical army for him. And whether he wants to be this in charge of an army of fanatics doesn't seem to, worry her. She's just going to do it, right? And so you see this sort of like, I'm going to do these things, but very, very much, I'm still Bene Gesserit. This is what we do
Yeah.
before anything
Yeah.
else.
I think the writing for her in this one is a little bit better, and I do think that Rebecca Ferguson's performance is pretty knockout for this part, especially. There's just that moment where she's like staring at the camera and talking about how we need to start with like the weak ones, and you're like, oh, this is scary. Yeah, and so what I was talking about, I don't remember if this was before we got recording or not. With the again, one of the major changes is Alia not being born.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, is she's not born throughout this entire movie. So the identity, not the identity, but like the person who kills Baron Harkonnen has to change, and that ends up being Paul, which is, both my dogs are on my bed and making noise. But there's a moment early on, and by early on, it's a 900-page book, so it's like page 300. But there's a moment early on in the book whenever Paul's prescience is starting to like manifest, and he sees an alternate timeline where he greets the Harkonnen as "Hello, grandfather," and kills him himself. And he says in the book that timeline is like far too horrifying to walk down. And that's kind of what's happening here. There's a couple different changes in the movie, especially towards the ending, of how Chani isn't necessarily on board with Paul's messiahhood, and also the Landsrad, the great houses, oppose him, which did not happen in the novel. The jihad was more of a like they were just spreading the word of Muad'Dib, whereas here there is actually like an opposition to his ascendance to the throne, which is interesting.
Yeah, I know. In the book, aren't they? It doesn't. The Spacing Guild plays a part, and right, because they can see that Paul can. Their prescience tells them that Paul can destroy the spice, and so they basically say, "Hey, look, everybody, what he says goes. You're not emperor anymore. Landsrod needs to go home. We need spice, so that's our number one priority."
Yeah, which, so everything is kind of sped up in terms of just like the timeline. It's I think there's like a 2-year jump in the book, whereas now it's just
couple of months, maybe.
Yeah, about I guess if you start from part one, probably about a year. And I feel like you could maybe headcanon that like the Spacing Guild didn't show up because like they didn't have time to like prepare or anything. Like I don't know, but there's some changes that do feel like Denis Villeneuve might be characterizing this timeline as a worse timeline than the novel, which would be interesting because it would kind of make it like just an alternate canon to the books, and would explain some of the missing things, but it doesn't explain certain things like Thufir Hawat not being there, or I thought there was another character missing.
Count Fenring has not shown up.
Yeah.
Marco Fenring shows up, but Count Fenring does not. Yeah.
And he's one where I feel like him missing isn't as big of a deal. The lack of Thufir Hawat is kind of a problem, I guess, for me. It's one of those things where it's like when you're thinking about it just on like a surface level, he doesn't necessarily add a whole lot, but like at the end of the novel, whenever he dies in Paul's arms, this is also whenever Paul is like, you know, ascending to the throne and everything. And there's this vibe of like Thufir Hawat has served the Atreides for like 3 generations, and his passing is like another symbol of House Atreides is going to be something totally different now. And having that not be there is a little disappointing. But
yeah, he just is gone. Yeah, maybe he'll show up later. I don't know, or because we see what happens at Duncan, Idaho. We see, you know, Gurney Halleck, but then Thufir Hawat is just missing.
Yeah.
And they're like the Atreides 3 Musketeers, kind of, you know.
Kinda, yeah. I do like the changes made with Chani, where I liked that at the beginning there was like a group that didn't buy into Paul, and I think that she serves as a and I think Denis Villeneuve has even talked about this in interviews. I think that she serves as a good like speaker for the theme of the movie
and the audience too. Right?
Yeah, where she's like, hey, now hold on. Stilgar, I feel like goes into zealotry a little too quickly.
Yeah, that was my big problem with Stilgar, because in the book he starts off more as a father figure and then like a friend, and there's a point, I'm pretty sure it's in Dune, it might be an early part of Dune Messiah, but where Paul's thinking, because everybody thinks to themselves in those books, right? So
yeah,
he's thinking, you know, Stilgar used to be like this friend, and now he's turning to worship her, and it's like a lessening of the man, right?
Yeah.
But you don't see that here, because Stilgar just starts off being as it's written,
Yeah.
you know, he's Elisa Al Gabe, and you're like, there's just no like character arc.
Yeah. That is that's in part, that's in the first book. He has that thought, and he also thinks that about Gurney Halleck, because he does something that like manages to convince Gurney Halleck in this religion, and he's like, that's just another friend gone. And he says that line kind of in the middle of the movie to Gurney about like all of the Fremen that are around him, and he's like, they used to be friends, but now they're worshipers. And Gurney's like, I don't see a problem with that,
right?
which is a little, yeah. Gurney Halleck is like, just let me use the atomics one last time. I need to see some destruction. But Stilgar, I do think there's some comedy to it, which I think was intentional, but it does end up becoming a little tragic just how much of a fanatic he is. I do wish there was a little bit more of a fall there, like into the fanaticism. But I do think that like one of the funnier moments of the movie was like whenever Paul is like, I'm not a messiah, and then he's just like, he's so humble.
Right.
He's got to be.
I mean, that's really straight out of Life of Brian.
I was going to say, that's pulled straight out of Life of Brian.
When Brian is like, I'm not the Messiah, and then, you know, someone shouts out, only the true Messiah denies his divinity, you know, and he just can't get his people to stop following him. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think Timothée Chalamet does a pretty phenomenal job, like bringing just this like conflicted quality to Paul, where it's this thing of like, he wants revenge, but he knows that if he gets his revenge, it's going to spark a whole holy war. And he doesn't really want the power, but also he kind of does. And he's trying to constantly prove himself to like Chani because he's in love with her, but like constantly like betraying that trust because he keeps getting higher and higher with power. Um, and I thought that he did a really good job. I've been a Timmy believer. I know that some people don't like him, but especially after seeing him in Bones and All, which was a movie from I think 2022, which was like a weird cannibal romance thing.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not for everyone. But he's really great in that, and in this, I think he like really steps up because in part one he doesn't do a whole lot. You get that one scene in the still tent that I think he really gets to kind of flex a little bit. But even then, that's mostly just like he's shouting. And I feel like a lot of people equate good acting to shouting or crying. And it's like sometimes there's more to it than just that.
I've seen a complaint about Dave Bautista here. Oh, all Raban does is shout, and with Fade Ralph, all he does is like shout, and it's like, okay, but now
Well,
I'll go with the Rabans. They're not much to do with the character Raban. I mean, his uncle's basically just using him to dispose of him, right? So
yeah,
he's there to put down rebellions and then get probably stabbed in the back by his uncle at some point.
yeah, and even then, I feel like Batista isn't getting a whole lot of credit for this because again, it does seem like he just shouts a lot, but there's some fear there. It's not just like angry guy. He does. I think Dave Bautista does do a pretty decent job, and I think even like Austin Butler, for as much of like kind of like a gremlin that character is, like just like again, he's like salivating in the gladiator ring, and you're like, oh god. There's a lot of like little things he adds to sell that insanity, I feel like, but also he kind of moves like a cat during like that throne room scene. There's like just little things I feel like where if you're not necessarily looking for them, you would just be like, oh, all they did was just shout. Like
yeah. When we see Raban running back to the ornithopters, I think he thinks it's going to be so easy to clean up this Fremen mess, and then they attack back, and he realizes they're going to lose, and he runs away. But also, I think the character of Fade, they really tried to get a little more like three dimensions in there because it didn't strike me the first time I saw the movie, but the second time, at the end of the fight where Paul stabbed him and he's dying, he says something like, "You fought well," or something like that, and those are his last words. You're like, okay, that doesn't sound like the last word of this complete psychopath, right?
Yeah.
There's a little bit more to this character than just I stab people and I feed them to my cannibal girls in the whatever.
Oh god, those cannibal girls are
straight out of David Lynch, right? That's
like
here's our homage to David Lynch weirdness.
Yeah. And also everyone was wondering what Austin Butler was going to do with his voice because he's apparently stuck in Elvis mode now for life or something. And I thought that his voice was pretty close to Stellan Skarsgård, which was kind of cool. But there are some little moments like that, like whenever Paul does kill the Baron, the reaction shot of Fade is like 5 different emotions at once of like anger, fear, jealousy, happy, intrigue. Like he's feeling all of these things at once because he's like, that was my kill, and who are you to do this? But also, who are you? Like he's very interested in Paul, which I think is cool, especially since I don't think the movies get into this, but the original breeding program in the book was that that Paul was supposed to be a girl, and that Fade and Paul would get together and end the house feud between the Harkonnen and Atreides,
and their kid would be the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yeah. So Paul is like a generation too early, which I think uh, also is a good explanation for why everything that ends up going wrong in the series goes wrong. Is because it was like, yeah, he wasn't supposed to be here yet.
Yeah.
um, but I
But you
think
also
that
have like what you mentioned with like Count Fenring, he and Paul, when they look at each other in that throne room scene at the end of the book, he realizes that the Count could have been the Kwisatz Haderach. There's just like there's some genetic fault in him where he couldn't quite be it. He's a failed Kwisatz Haderach, and therefore he's
yeah,
like sterile. And and that's why when the Emperor asks Count Fenring to kill Paul, his first choice is my champion, not Fade. And the Count looks at Paul, and Paul looks at the Count. They kind of realize they're the same. They're these end results of this breeding program. One is a generation too early. The other one's doesn't have quite the right genes, and so the Count just like I won't do it. I won't attack this guy. And so then Fade steps forward, is like now well I'll do it.
yeah,
So there is like this moment between Paul and the Count in the book, which obviously we're not going to get with Paul and anyone else here, but it's kind of interesting to see because obviously the breeding program keeps developing almost Kwisatz Haderachs, right?
yeah.
And who may not know that they are almost, but the Count clearly understands that if there was like one tweak different in his genes, he would have been it, right? But
Yeah,
instead it's this guy, other guy.
and then the books, like the later books, start getting into just like, oh yeah, everyone is sort of a Kwisatz Haderach. like you have in the one that I'm on right now, Heretics, you have uh oh, what's his name? Um, you have Tuek, who
Mm-hmm.
is like part of the Atreides line and uh is like an incredible mentat, and it's kind of implied that he has potential to be a Kwisatz Haderach, but also Duncan Idaho does because of how many times he's been cloned and how much genetic memory each clone gets or whatever. Um, which uh, I've been joking that like Jason Momoa will have like a long career in this franchise if they adapt the sequels. But
I'll be
there's a
trucking
certain
Idaho
point.
wherever.
There's a certain point where it's like they'll have to recast him or something because in Heretics of Dune he's like 15. Like, um, but yeah, there are just like small characters and small moments that like I think do make the book feel um a bit more uh layered and interesting than the movies end up feeling. um I do like that the movies don't try to hold your hand at all. I saw someone say that the movies work well as companion pieces to the novels, where it's like essentially if you just want some visuals and like audio to go with the book, the movies are a really good answer to that, while they're not going to have all of the characters and all of the plot explained the way that the book does it. If you know the book, you're going to be able to follow it fine. Like again, the Spacing Guild is referenced in the
Once.
opening of part one, and then they are also there on Caladan when they hand over Arrakis, like the deed to Arrakis. And the Spacing Guild is like a huge deal, and without knowing what the Spacing Guild is and knowing the monopoly that they hold, you kind of don't understand like why spice is so important, and outside of people just saying that it's the most important thing in the universe.
Right. I think my husband has not read the book, and I'm pretty sure he felt he knew what was going on. But I think on a surface level, really, it's just like an action movie.
Yeah.
You think here's some good guys who are obviously a little more complex than that, and here's some bad guys, and we have some explosions. So, and there's some background stuff that's cool that maybe you don't have to understand too much just to appreciate all the visuals and the battle scenes and stuff. It's clearly the people who haven't read the book who've been doing these podcasts are just blown away.
Yeah.
So I guess
there is something that I saw. There was like a tweet that I saw or something that I responded to. I do think the core plot of Dune isn't that complicated. It is basically Duke gets betrayed by Emperor, son gets revenge.
I mean,
That is the core, and I feel like you can strip it down to just that core and have a compelling story. I think these movies are a good showcase of that. It's just that the books feel much more
the
kind of,
world's more fleshed out.
yeah, it's much
It
more lived in.
it's basically a hero's journey, right? You know, he gets to go off and have an adventure. Starts off, you know, with the being separated and goes in the belly of the whale, and you know comes out on top. So, I mean, that basic plot is ancient.
Yeah, for sure. And well, it's that basic plot is what uh Campbell liked about the first book and why he published it in his sci-fi magazine, and it's what he hated about the second book and did not publish it in his sci-fi magazine, because the second book essentially tears down the hero's journey, which I'm really curious how Denis Villeneuve will adapt it on just a couple different levels, because immediate concern. So the second novel is like probably my favorite in the series and probably one of
I
my
think
favorite
mine too.
books.
Yeah.
It's so untypical of a sequel. You know, it's not more of the same. It's pretty different, and it's also just kind of meditative and self-reflective. Um, and the way that this movie ends makes me wonder, okay, so how is Chani going to get back to Paul, and how are they going to end up having kids and stuff? Or is it just going to be completely different with the same kind of political intrigue plot? I kind of like the idea that because it's not a very exciting book, uh, through the adaptation, they would make it like a romance story, like a
Right.
tragic romance where
The
Paul wins
triangle.
her back.
Yeah. But Ireland is
And
still standing there,
yeah,
his official wife. Yeah.
so I'd be interested in that. But also the issue of adapting that novel is that it is basically 300 pages of people sitting in throne rooms going, "I hate that guy," and then they try to kill him, and then it doesn't work.
Right. Well, and it's to me, and I guess I've always wondered. I watch these movies. I really love like superhero movies and these kind of high fantasy, science fiction, big idea movies. If I'm going to spend like $30 on a ticket, then I want it to be explosions and stuff like that.
Yeah,
But I could watch a small, like indie movie at home. But to me, you see all these movies after movies, read book after book after book, where someone wants to take over the world or the universe or whatever. They want to be in charge, right? It seems to be like the reason Detroit for a lot of bad guys. All right. Well, and I always think, okay, fine. You want to be in charge. You understand that after you're in charge, you have to administer the thing,
yeah,
right? There's work involved. You can't just take over and be done. Then you have to like run it.
yeah,
And I think Dune Messiah kind of shows what happens when you then have to run it. and
yeah,
and it's hard, and you're more likely to just fall and fail, right? Maybe you had the fanatical army, you took over, you're on the throne, yay! But now, the daily thing of collecting taxes and administering justice, and all that kind of making sure the economy is working, and um, it's a day-to-day grind of just running however many dozens or hundreds of thousands of planets are out there
yeah.
with people on them, and they all have needs and wants, and there's commerce and there's infrastructure, and it's hard.
And
And people,
that doesn't sound like a super compelling novel, but it is. Like it works really well. I'm curious because again, everything that Denis Villeneuve has kind of emphasized with his adaptations is the scale and the action and the epicness of it all. And it's like, okay, well, this is going to dial it back to just kind of these throne rooms. So yeah, I mean, like it's a fantastic novel, and I'm kind of scared but excited for when they get to it.
well, I think my nervousness would be people who have not read the books may not, and I know this is Frank Herbert's kind of thing too. People didn't understand that Paul's not the hero, that
Yeah,
he is not good, right? I mean, he wanted to be in the beginning, but it didn't work out, right? So in the second book, he's really not good, and Ali, of course, is slowly going insane, and so there's trouble back at the farm, and I I think an audience who doesn't know that going in to Dune Messiah would be like, what's happening? This is the
Yeah.
character that I liked in the first two movies, and he's the hero that I want to see, win and triumph. And he's not being very heroic, and then he doesn't win, and he doesn't triumph, and he walks off to the desert, to die. Um, I think what would the audience reaction be if they don't already know Paul's journey because they haven't read the books? I mean, I think that'd be like
Yeah.
a real stunner for people to walk into this movie, be like, okay, and it's another movie about Paul winning and doing cool things, and oh,
It's not that.
it's not
The
that.
the so again, I think that the part two does kind of try to play their hand a little earlier than the book did. But I have seen people reacting to it not getting it in that sense where it's like not understanding that no, Paul isn't the hero here. Uh and so yeah, I'm also curious what like the audience reaction to Dune Messiah as a film would be, because the audience reaction to the book when it first came out was not positive from what I've heard. From everything I heard, it was very much a lot of people going, "What the hell is going on? Why is this? What are you doing to the character that I love?" um, and I like kind of I guess the word is a like transgressive uh works of art and fiction, things that kind of challenge the audience and sometimes makes them a little mad. I find those kind of interesting. Um, and I think that is part of why I like Messiah so much, is because it asks a lot for the audience and does not treat the audience nicely. um, so and again, I'm a big Denis Villeneuve fan. So like these movies have made me pretty happy because I'm getting more Denis Villeneuve sci-fi. I know that Blade Runner isn't his Blade Runner isn't everyone's favorite. I personally liked it a lot. I thought Arrival was pretty good, pretty great, and every movie of his that I've seen, I haven't seen his like pre 2010 stuff. I've really liked. A lot of people try to kind of blow him off as not having a style. I don't think that's true. I think it's more that his style is kind of cold and tries to distance you a little bit from the characters, so that you're more watching them than you are being them. And I
Well,
feel like that,
yeah, the cinematography though is similar, right? You have these huge landscapes and then like little people in them, kind of
yeah,
show that how big things are and how little people can be. It seems to be like one of the shots he likes to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah. I mean, yeah, I like his stuff. I think he's a great filmmaker. So I'm excited for whatever he does next. I think he's taking a break from Dune
Mhm.
to do either Rendezvous with Rama or something else.
And it's like, what? Okay, Rendezvous with Rama. How do you turn that one into a movie? Is there a
Yeah.
climax to that book? I can't even remember if anything really happened in that book except they wander around Rama for a while and then go home.
He said something about it would be like Arrival on steroids.
Hmm.
So I'm curious about how that goes. Um I'm a big fan of like aliens and sci-fi where uh we don't immediately go to war with them and they
Hmm.
don't declare war on us, and it's more of like Arrival feels like an update of Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Hmm. Okay.
um and I remember being blown away by Arrival just because it was like, this is a sci-fi thing where there isn't like a war. That's awesome. it,
Well, also
it
the
happens
aliens
so
are kind of
rarely.
alien, right? I
Yeah,
mean, usually we meet aliens and they're pretty much people. And not just
yeah,
because you have to cast them and you have to cast human beings, but just they kind of think like people and they kind of, have the same needs. They have to eat and sleep. And, it seemed pretty, similar to us. But these aliens in Arrival were definitely
they were like hands or something. Like,
weird. And you're like, okay, they think and they don't, time works differently and their whole language is this was different. And so trying to communicate with them was so hard. And I like that. It's like, okay, the aliens are actually like alien.
Yeah.
So that's an accomplishment. And I liked Blade Runner as well. I know people seem to like to diss on that movie a lot, but then I don't know. It's sometimes fashionable to not like things. Yeah, I think it's very
Yeah.
fashionable to diss on David Lynch's Dune, which my husband had not seen, his parents had not seen. So we watched it with them. We were visiting his parents last week. So I've just seen it recently. And there's some cringy parts but the opening 10 minutes are all exposition. Everything a character says is exposition. And you can see why, right? They're trying to
Yeah.
explain this really huge universe, and David Lynch has got like 2.5 hours to tell you all about it.
Yeah.
And that's not enough time. Obviously, Denis Villeneuve didn't even have enough time in almost 6 hours to even get the
Yeah.
spacing guild really in there, you know? So, I think David Lynch, although there's some cringy dialogue, the sets are amazing. The casting was amazing. I like the music. Other people hate the Toto
Oh,
soundtrack,
I
but
love the Toto
I
soundtrack. I
like
think it's
it.
the best part.
And, it does a lot and it catches a lot of the book and the thought that went behind a lot of it. Like everything on Caliban's made of wood, right? Everything on Gidi Prime is dark and like black and shiny. And
Yeah.
everything on Arrakis is sort of bright and washed out and stone. And, the throne room is all jade and gold. And it works. And I love her, Jose Ferrer. I mean, you know, so
It
there's a
almost
lot of things that
captures.
really like that. And it's just that there are cringy parts.
Yeah.
And the fact that the characters are always thinking, which is kind of cringy, but at the same time, that's what they're doing in the book.
Yeah.
Characters are always thinking to themselves. And Ireland basically narrates the book. I saw a review of it whenever it came out in '84, and I was blown away when I saw the movie the first time. I walked out the theater like, wow, the visuals just like bowled me over. Um, but you know, I saw this review the next day, like, well, why does this walk-on character be the one who has to tell us everything? She just like walks on at the end, and then she's the one. Well,
That's
yeah,
the
but
book.
she narrates the book. You haven't read the book. Every chapter starts with a quote from Ireland. And characters are always talking to themselves. And there's always plans within plans within plans, and everything you say and everything you do is being observed by 30 people, and they're all measuring everything you say and do. So you're measuring everything you say and do, in public or even in private, because you're being watched. And just the level of hyper awareness everyone has as to everyone else is watching me, everyone is judging me, everyone's trying to kill me or whatever. And so I have to say this or do this. And when I say this line to this person, I'm really talking to the person who's listening to me in the other room, right? Or reading my mind or something. So
Yeah.
I think David Lynch really tried to capture some of that. And
Yeah.
I know that it works on the screen very well, but it's really like how the book is structured.
I think
So,
I think so. I mean, I don't think David Lynch's movie is without merit. My main issues with it is more the third act is a mess, which the book's third act is kind of a mess too, if I'm being honest. But it's rushed at the very least. There's a lot going on, but that's due to Dino De Laurentiis saying like last minute, no, you can't make a 3 hour long movie. Cut this down to about like 2 hours and 10 minutes.
mhm.
And so he didn't really even get to make his third act. He just kind of condensed it all into one scene. Uh, but
Yeah.
my main issue is the uh, it doesn't get the theme right.
Mhm.
It gets a lot more of the moments than Denis Villeneuve's adaptation does. Like Thufi Hawata is there, he dies. There's they actually explain a little bit more with Dr. Yue. There's quite a few moments and elements from the novel that are in there. They're rushed or slightly tweaked, but in comparison to Denis Villeneuve's, there's more there from the book. The issue is just it doesn't quite understand the why. It sees the end
Mhm.
result, but it doesn't understand the why. And so it ends with Paul having it rain on Arrakis through his magic powers or whatever. And it's like, that doesn't work for me. I think that's a little kind of spits in the face of what the book was trying to do, especially with the context of Dune Messiah. Um, and like you said, there are some cringy things, but it's not without merit. I do think the soundtrack is phenomenal. I listen to the soundtrack like every now and again. And the set design is interesting. The art direction for that movie basically defined what Dune looked like for decades until I think probably the Denis Villeneuve movie. Uh, there were some like covers and stuff that came out kind of in the 2000s and 2010s that tried to sway it a little more modern, slick than the kind of almost like I don't even know how to describe it. There's the Denis, not the Denis, the Lynch aesthetic is like they're gonna look like they're from World War II, and these people are gonna wear trash bags, and these people there's all of these different like design philosophies blending into this one thing, and that almost makes more sense than having everything look the same because it is 20,000 years into the future and they're all on these separate planets. Their aesthetics would look different. It's kind of the Star Wars problem of like everything in Star Wars looks kind of samey. Like you go to one planet, like Jakku and Tatooine look the exact same. There's nothing on Jakku that looks different from Tatooine. No technology, nothing. And it's like, well, these are planets separated by thousands of light years, probably separated by millennia of culture. They should have different things. And I think the Villeneuve one, the Harkonnens look very distinct from Carino and look very distinct from Atreides. But the Lynch one really kind of steeped that into more real world aesthetics. I feel like that's just interesting. It's interesting to look at. And I think Kyle MacLachlan he's not quite perfect casting for Paul in the first book, but I think he actually is perfect casting for Paul in Messiah. Because MacLachlan is a little too big in my mind to be like a 15-year-old. He was basically the same age as Timothée Chalamet.
Timothée Chalamet looks young. I mean,
yeah, like, but he looks a decade older than Timothée Chalamet did in that movie. And so I like him. I also feel like the importance that movie had on Lynch's career is interesting to look at, especially since it introduced Lynch and Kyle MacLachlan to each other, and they would go on to do Twin Peaks and
Blue Velvet.
Blue Velvet. Yeah, Blue Velvet was the movie right after Dune, which Lynch kind of took Dune basically to just get a blank check for Blue Velvet. And again, I'm a movie fan, so I adore David Lynch's movies. I could probably talk about. I still haven't seen Mulholland Drive, but I could probably talk about any of his movies for hours. Eraserhead, I think, is while it is surreal and bizarre, I think it's a great achievement. And I like that some of his choices in aesthetics from Eraserhead bleed into his adaptation of Dune, like the Space and Guild Navigator basically just looks like the Eraserhead baby.
But it was pretty cool because, you know, it's kind of similar to the book, right? He's floating in this spice mix, you know?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Well, anyway, back to Denis Villeneuve's version, do you have any final thoughts on Dune Part 2?
It's exciting. I think so again, movie fan, I think absolutely a movie that needs to go, like, you need to go to the theater and like see it like loud and large. It kind of blew me away. Over the like pre-pandemic, I was pretty like, I think more things should go to streaming. I don't want to go to the theater. And over the course of the last couple of years, I've had some pretty great theater experiences, and I'm kind of leaning more towards like, no, I think theater is important, and I think seeing movies large and loud is important. It's just that you need to be seeing kind of the right ones. Like, I think a horror movie will always be more effective in a theater, especially with like a crowd. And this is one of those as well, where it's like, go see this like in IMAX, or however you can afford it, because I know IMAX can be a little pricey. I've seen it in like just standard and IMAX. So I've seen both versions, and I think both are stellar. Um, and yeah, I can't wait for Dune Messiah. I'm like I'm terrified of it getting adapted, but I'm also really excited. Uh, yeah, it's awesome. I can't wait for, maybe this will just become like the new Star Wars and get milked forever. I'm okay with that. It's more interesting to me than Star Wars.
Well, there's certainly a lot of the world you can explore. We haven't seen the Tleilaxu yet. We haven't seen the
No,
Spacing Guild. We haven't really seen a whole lot of the Bene Gesserit stuff. So
we are
at,
supposed to be getting a TV series of the Bene
we are,
Gesserit.
yeah. And I know Kevin Anderson is writing a lot of these companion books, and the one that came out last October that I have not read yet is, I think, specifically about Irulan and Chani. And maybe
Yes.
Jessica. So it's like from the female point of view, from these characters leading up to the events, I guess, in Dune, and what their lives are like. So that might be a rather interesting book. So there are certainly a lot of other companion novels too. Going to the Butlerian Jihad, we could have a whole series on that, movies or TV show. So the world is certainly big enough already to just fill the movie screens and TV screens, and for years with stories, without even having to like write anything new.
Yeah, as long as they have interesting creatives behind it, I'm on board. I know that Denis Villeneuve wants to just do like a trilogy and then tap out, and that's fine. I feel like if they were ever to touch the like weirder aspects of the series, which is like Children of Dune onward, I'm really curious who they would get, because I don't think you can just get like some type of like jobber to do that. You would have to get someone weird. I anytime there's like a weird source material, my go-to is, because David Cronenberg is getting too old, my go-to now is his son Brandon Cronenberg.
Okay.
I'd be interested to see his version of God Emperor of Dune, if he had any interest in doing that. Because of course I feel like the person approaching it should have an interest. They shouldn't just be like tasked with it. So only if he's interested.
Yeah, I think the Butlerian Jihad would be something interesting to have on TV or in a movie. Because I remember another thing that people complained about the David Lynch version was like, this is supposed to be in the far future, and everybody has to fight with knives and swords. Why have they, it's like, well, there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And you just can't explain the whole background of AI and people and wars and why we've gone back to like this feudal system. And so that might be another place to have a really great TV series. You could have, season upon season of Butlerian Jihad. I wouldn't mind that. So, but there's certainly a lot of source material where people can go to. I think obviously between Dylan and I, we really liked this movie. I liked it better the second time. I think you mentioned you liked it better the second time as well.
Yes.
So
because again, first time I was like, hey, this is very different. I don't know how I feel about this. But then like the movie fan in me was like, well, I mean, this is awesome. But again, the book fan was just like, wait, roll it back. Where's this? Where's that? What happened? It was like an uncomfortable viewing experience, not knowing what was going to make it and what wasn't going to make it. And then the second time I watched it, I just got to experience it, as opposed to like anticipating what may or may not be there.
Maybe that was my problem too. I don't know, but I did like it better the second time. So go see Dune Part 2. And certainly watch Dylan and I talk about Dune Part 1. I'll put that, as I said, that link down in the description. And we'll see you next time. And remember to hit like and subscribe. All right. Thanks, Dylan, for sharing your time with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.